Hi there. Welcome to the Sober Circle channel. Enjoy this speaker tape.
I commend this gentleman to you, Talbot H. from Greensboro, North Carolina. And believe me, you are in for a treat. Talbot.
Damn, Bill, you oughtn't have said all that. Sometimes I think I'd like to take some of these fine introductions that you get in Alcoholics Anonymous, put them on my tombstone, let the pigeons finish the rest of it. Can y'all hear me back there in left field? One of these things sort of like a ballroom spit tune. If you don't get exactly the right range on it, you just make a hell of a mess. My name is Talbot Hagood, and I'm a very grateful and a very nervous alcoholic. Hi. First, I want to thank Bill Moore and all of the members of the program committee for being so wonderfully kind as to allow a thing like me to participate in a small way in something as beautiful as the 17th anniversary of Alcoholics Anonymous in Blount County, Tennessee. When Bill first called me, he said, "I hate to impose, but would you come?" And for a thing that can still remember what it was like when nobody asked him to do anything except leave, how in the hell can you impose by inviting him somewhere? A bunch of us drove out yesterday from Greensboro, 2 carloads of us. And we got in these mountains, and I looked around at all of God's beauty. I couldn't help but think that God must have been in a mighty good humor when he made Tennessee. And I'm sure he was happy as a bird when he picked the folks that he's going to put here to live. And I've been worried ever since Bill asked me if I'd talk to you, because as some of you know, there's been some rumblings from all over the country about time. It seems that some of us talk too long. There's no boy here tonight that I love very, very much. He had his 3rd birthday Thursday night, and I talked at that birthday, and oh, it was hot that night. We didn't have air conditioning. And I made a remark before the meeting started to an old boy that believes in telling it like it is. I said, people all over the country are very conscious about time. He said, yeah, and it's bastards like you that made them conscious of it. But there's been so much talk about a time limit that I never get up in front of a crowd of people now that I don't think about them 2 monkeys in that rocket ship going to the moon. One of them looked at the other and said, "Ain't this a hell of a way to make a living?" He said, "Yeah, but it beats the hell out of that cancer clinic." Regardless of how long it takes, this book here says that I'm supposed to tell you what it was like and what happened, what it's like now. And I hope you don't mind too much. That's going to take a while. Because I'm 57 years old and I've been drunk half my life. The only way I know to tell you what happened, what it's like, what it was like, and what happened what it's like now is to go back and sort of mentally relive it and try to describe it to you as we go along. And I believe they call this thinking on your feet, and I ain't too good at that. Not near as good as an old judge I tell about back home. It seemed one night at the supper table, this old judge told his wife that he had to go back to the office after supper and study a case that he had to hand down a decision on next morning. Bless her heart, she bought that. But it seemed that when he left the house, he didn't go to the office. He got with the boys. And he took on a few. It seemed a few too many, because somewhere during the course of the evening, he regurgitated. Bobby, that means he puked on his shirt. And all the way home, he's thinking, what in the hell am I going to tell my wife? But he managed to get in without waking her up, and next morning at the breakfast table, he very skillfully guided the conversation along all the line, didn't mention that little incident, and thought he got by with it. But at the front door, when she handed him his hat, she said, I don't know where you went last evening, but when you came home, there was vomit on your clothes. He didn't bat an eye. He said a drunk done that. And if he comes before me this morning, I'm going to give him 30 days. She must have been to some of them Al-Anon meetings, because she didn't bat an eye neither. She said you ought to give him 60 days, because he done something in your britches, too. For a long time after I first came to Alcoholics Anonymous, I said I was born an alcoholic. But then I stopped saying that because I realized one day that I honestly didn't know. And then for a long time I said I became an alcoholic as a result of taking one drink of whiskey. But then I stopped saying that too, because once again I realized that I honestly didn't know. But I have come to believe that because of some things that happened to me way, way back, the God that I understand today, the beautiful God that you gave me, saw the necessity of me becoming an alcoholic in order that I might one day be a member of the human race. Because for a lot of years I wasn't a member of anything, and I didn't belong anywhere or belong to anybody. And I think the first of these things that happened, and this is as far back as I can remember, it's the first thing I ever remember. It happened late one night when I was 4 years old, and I woke up and there was a loud argument going on downstairs in the room below me, where my mom and daddy stayed. And I heard the word adopted, and I didn't know what it meant. But I found out in a few minutes that it meant that I didn't belong there. And that this man that I called Dad didn't want me there. In fact, he thought I should be sent back to wherever it was I came from. And I remember from that day on, for the next 28 years when I met you beautiful people, I was afraid. And if anybody had asked me during those 28 years, what are you afraid of, I would have had to say I don't know. But the fear was as real as anything I've ever felt. But I'd like to say right here now that nothing that ever happened in my life, nothing that I ever did, was the fault of my foster parents, because they were wonderful people. And I started out in a little town. Well, hell, it wasn't no town, really. It seemed more like it was a place where about 90 people went broke and got stranded at the same time. Hell, wouldn't nobody gone there on purpose. But even though it was a real small settlement, there was two big fine churches there, and looking back, there's something about that never did quite ring true. One of them was a Baptist church and one was a Methodist, and I was taught as a child, you don't go over there to that one, you go to this one, because that bunch over there ain't going to make it. And somehow this just didn't seem right, because some of them folks that went over there did better than some of them went here. But even though there was two big fine churches, there wasn't money enough in that community to pay somebody to sweep up, much less preach regular. So at this little church that I went to, this little Methodist church, different members of the congregation took turns on Sunday conducting some type of layman service. Except every summer, about the time folks' gardens came in, there'd be one of these old boys that had come riding in, and for some reason they always come from either Kentucky or West Virginia. They didn't grow them nowhere else. They called them circuit riders. My granddaddy called them something else, but I won't go into that. It seemed one of these old boys made a pass at Grandma one summer. Lord, he ought not to have done it. For years afterwards, that was known as the summer of the short revival. But like I said, about this time every year, one of these old boys would come riding in, usually on a mule, and they'd freeload at somebody's house, and they'd be preaching every night till all the grocers was gone and the collection cut off to nothing. Then you know it was over till next year. And I remember this particular afternoon, I was 7 years old, and I was playing out in the front yard, and I looked coming up the lane. There was the biggest white man I'd ever seen in my life. He had to be at least 7 feet tall. And I was scared of him, because we didn't grow him that size around there. He rode up to where I was and announced that he was a visiting preacher and that he was staying at our house. Had nobody invited him, but that's why he stayed. And there was preaching that first night, and they had all us little folks sitting up on the front row where they could watch us. And this old boy, he preached loud and he preached long. He talked for hours about God's hate, and he didn't once mention the word love. And then he talked for a long time about something he said God hated more than he did anything else, something called sin. And right in the middle of this, he shook his finger right at me and hollered, "You are a sinner." And he shook me up with that, singling me out in that crowd of folks. And then he talked for a hell of a long time about this place he said I was going, because I was one of them things. A place called hell. And he told it real scary. And when he finally cut off or run down, they played what they called the invitational hymn. And I was the first one up to shake hands with him. Not because of any sudden desire to save my soul. Hell, 7 years old, I didn't know I had one of them. And it certainly wasn't because of any love that I felt for this scary God that he talked about. I went up and shook hands with him because he had scared the living hell out of me. And I mean that literally. Because for weeks afterwards, 2 or 3 nights a week, I'd have a nightmare. Wake up screaming, and Mama have come put me in bed with them. And this nightmare, this bad dream, was always the same thing over and over. It would always be late at night in this dream, and outdoors it's thundering and lightning, and the wind's blowing, and the trees are breaking off. And me and all these other little folks in that community, we huddle in this little church, scared to death, waiting for this great big something to come from out yonder somewhere and get us and take us to that place called hell. And I think maybe subconsciously, it was long about here that I promised myself, if I ever get big enough to say I ain't going to church, I just ain't going. I realize now that this one unfortunate childhood experience separated me from anything divine. Because I got a picture from this of God as being something bad. A big, scary something or somebody that sat way up somewhere out of sight of me, but where he could see me. And that he spent all of his time just watching and waiting for me to do something wrong so he could punish me. And I didn't want any part of this. That same year, something else was to happen that I think played a large part in what I was to become. I was to start the public school. And I had looked forward to this because I was a loner, not by choice. I was a loner because there were no other children to play with for miles around. And I didn't know at that time that I was any different from anybody else. Some of you this weekend may have noticed the scars on my face. I was horribly burned in one of these freak home accidents when I was 18 months old. And this is back in the day when plastic surgery was more or less unheard of in that part of the country. So I didn't get any plastic surgeries until I was 20-some years old and a patient in Walter Reed Hospital while I was in the Army during World War II. But all the years in between, 3/4 of my face was covered with scars. I couldn't close my eyes. I couldn't close my mouth. And I didn't have any ears. These two were grafted on. But as I said, nobody had ever told me that I looked different from other people, and for some reason I'd never noticed it. And as I say, I had looked forward to going to school. I don't know that I had any ambition to learn anything, but I was lonesome. And I remember very well, very vividly, that first day that I was to go to school. My granddaddy didn't want me to go. He told Mama, said, Ellie, this little bastard ain't got the kind of head that'll hold her education. So if you let him stay here with me one day, maybe he'll have a little sense. Of course, Mama didn't listen, and it turned out that old man was right. A few years later, I end up with a little bit of education, no sense at all, drunk on top of it. And that first day at school, I'm about the middle of the morning when they had what they call a little recess. By the time I found my way out to the playground, all the other little children in my room, and there was some 54, 55 of them, they were already in a big circle, holding hands, going round in the ring. And when I tried to get in that circle, nobody would turn loose and make a place for me, but I kept trying. And finally, one tough little boy, and he was a little bit big on me, he stopped, and of course this stopped everybody else. And he looked at me and he said, and I quote, "You scarred-faced son of a bitch, we don't want to play with you." And he spit in my face. I learned two things about me in just a few seconds that moment. One, that I was different from other people, because I looked different. I learned, too, that I had an uncontrollable temper that made me a raving maniac, fully capable of killing another human being. Because I almost killed that little boy. He's 57 years old, too, now, and he has not spoken from that day to this above a whisper, because his voice box was crushed. When the teacher got out in the yard, he was unconscious, and I was on top of him, choking him, beating his head against a rock. She asked one question, who hit the first lick? I said, I did, and all them other little boys and girls, they backed me up. She sent his little sister after a switch, and she come back after a while with a limb off of a cinnamon tree, and she made a switch out of it on me. Wrote a note to my folks, sent me home. And all the way home, I'm thinking, wait till I tell Mama. She'll fix that teacher's wagon. But I must have forgot about that rule we had at our house. Rule to say, get one at school, get two more when you get back here. Mama read the note. She sent on about no teacher's wagon, just fixed mine again. Sent me upstairs to bed. I laid up there all afternoon thinking, well, wait till the old man gets home. Damn, he'll fix all of them. But I must have cried myself to sleep, because when I woke up, old man was home. They had that belt off, and damn if I won't get it fixed again. Nobody from that day to this has ever asked me why I hit that first lick. For some reason, it wasn't important to anybody but me. But from that day until 25 years later, when I met you people, I hated every human being that walked and breathed, including my own mother and father. And this is not normal. And I realize, too, that this unfortunate experience separated me from all the rest of humanity, because I was not capable for the next 25 years of feeling any human emotion except the most god-awful hate and a fear that sometimes came up in my throat and literally choked me. This is not normal. And even though I was just 7 years old, I had standard equipment that all little country boys had in my part of the country. My granddaddy saw to that. I had my own mule, my own hound dog, and my own rifle. And every time I caught the folks busy and not looking, I took my rifle and called the dog and got on that mule, and I left. And I'd be gone sometimes for days or weeks, several times for months. I'd be gone until somebody within a radius of 25 or 30 square miles would see me and come tell my folks where I was. And on these little excursions, I felt perfectly safe living in the woods by myself. I was not afraid of animals. I could trust them. It was people that bugged me. And on these little excursions, too, if I'd ride up to a farmhouse and found nobody at home, I set the house afire and I burned them out. I burned down stables and barns, haystacks. I cut fences to let cattle in to destroy crops. For these were things that belonged to the parents of those children that had laughed at me that day when that little boy called me that ugly name. And this was the only way I knew of hitting back. And I don't know why hitting back was so important, but it was. I couldn't adjust or accept what had happened. And I realized, too, that now, deep down inside, I hated God more than I did people. Because in my childish way of thinking, the way I put it together was that this God of punishment, just to make sure that I didn't get by with anything, he punished me before I had a chance to do anything. And this feeling, too, is not normal. And I was shot at a lot of times when I was 7, 8, 9 years old. And all this did was make the hate that much greater. And this, too, is not normal. I had to be whipped 2 or 3 times a week and made to go to school. I just didn't want to go where people were, because when anybody looked at me, I knew what they were seeing and what they were thinking. And I couldn't adjust to it. I didn't think it was fair. And there was nobody I could talk to about it. All I wanted was to belong somewhere to somebody. And then one night I was 13 years old, and I'd been told that I had to go to a little girl's birthday party. And I was in the house by myself. Mom and Dad had gone somewhere. And I got to thinking about this man that I called Dad, and I was scared of him. But that night I got to thinking even Mom was scared of him. Particularly early in the morning when he comes down to breakfast, nobody said good morning to this man. Till after he'd been in the kitchen and he got that little glass with that sugar and water in it, and he'd go in this little room off the breakfast room, and I'd watched him through the crack, pull something in that glass out of that big brown bottle, and then he'd drink it and smack his lips like it was so good. And he come out, and in a few minutes you didn't have to say good morning. You never heard as much conversation come out, old man. And I reckon I'd been curious about that closet for a long time. Of course, I'd been told I would never set foot in there. Maybe that's what did it. But that night I went in there. Didn't take a glass with any sugar and water. I didn't know how to make nothing. I took a full quart of White Horse Scotch. I opened it, and I took a good dust cutter, 5 or 6 big mouthfuls. And strangely enough, I liked it. And I got about halfway back upstairs. Now, Lord, something wonderful happened. I grew about 2 feet right now. And my shoulders got broad, and my hair got all curly and pretty. And all the scars went away. And I had 2 ears, just like everybody else. I felt like other people seemed to feel all the time. I wasn't better than anybody else, but I was just like everybody else. And I belonged. And that's all I ever wanted. I realize now, in looking back, that never in my life have I ever been able to take 1 drink of alcohol and predict with any degree of certainty where I would go or what I would do. Somehow I just always seem to know that with this drink, things are going to change. And believe me, they always did. I know, too, that what that first drink did for me left me absolutely no choice but to go back downstairs and get another one, and another one, and another one, and I don't know how many. I don't know how many trips I made back to the closet, but I didn't make it to that little gal's birthday party. Because I woke up or come to next morning about daybreak with the sun shining in my face, right out in my old man's front yard, and that won't never no place to come to. And we hear in AA from time to time that you become an alcoholic when you discover that next morning drink. That's when I discovered it, next morning. Because when I woke up, my first thought was, not am I going to get a whipping. Hell, I knew that was part of the deal last night. My first thought was, can I get through the basement window and down the coal chute, tiptoe up them basement steps and back to that closet and get one more shot of that beautiful stuff before I get the whipping. And that's exactly the way the morning went. My old man damn near killed me. And you know, I never did know whether it was for getting drunk or stealing his liquor. Dad had put a padlock on that closet. But you know, even though I was just 13 years old, it took me less than 20 minutes one afternoon with one of Mama's hairpins jiggling it in that lock. I opened it. Not because I wanted to be a locksmith. It was because I was an alcoholic. And that padlock stood between me and something that I had to have. My father was a doctor, and his hospital was next door to the house where we lived. He had to move his toddy over to the hospital, put it in the drug room, and lock it up in the safe where he kept his narcotics. But you know, even though I was just 13 years old, it took me less than 40 minutes late one night with my head against the door of that safe, twirling that little knob and listening for them clicks. I opened it. Not because I wanted to be a safe cracker, but because I was an alcoholic. And there was something locked up in that safe that I could not operate without. Because without it, I was absolutely nothing. My old man had to quit drinking. And a quart of that stuff used to last him from one Christmas to the next. But he had to quit. No family likes to admit they've got one, but my folks sure in hell had one. And it didn't take them long to find it out. But then it became necessary for me to lie, to cheat, and to steal, and to do a lot of other things that I honestly didn't want to do. I did them for the same reason you did, because I was an alcoholic. I did things that, when I was 15 years old, literally killed my mama. And if there's anybody in this room tonight that has something from the past that's still hard for you to live with, I'd like to share this with you. I'd been drinking 2 years when I was 15. And it had been 2 years since I'd seen my mama smile. And she had a beautiful smile. But I saw her cry because she cried every day. And I remember this particular Sunday afternoon when the sheriff came to our house. Came to see my daddy, but he wasn't there. So he told my mama that her little 15-year-old boy had to be in court next morning to answer charges of drunken disorderly, assault and battery, resisting arrest, and assaulting a police officer. And I remember when the sheriff left, Mama started upstairs, and she was crying. And she got up just a few steps, and she fell. She had a heart attack, and she never got well. And I remember the few short weeks that followed, when every day in the hospital, she loved Emerson's poems, and I read poetry to her, and I read to her from the Bible. And every day, as long as she could recognize me, she begged me to promise her that I'd never take another drink. And I remember making all those promises. And I meant them. God knows I meant them. You know I meant them. And Mama cried every day. And then just a short while after she was taken sick, I remember the day she was buried. And I didn't sit at the graveside with the rest of the folks. I didn't get out the car because I was so drunk I couldn't stand up. Mama cried that day, too. She cried a lot of days after that. But I've learned and come to honestly believe in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. And my mama's smiling tonight, because she knows where I am. And she loves the people I'm with. I think my mama loves every one of you. Not just for what you are, but for what you're trying to make out of me. In the 11th verse of the 84th Psalm, it says, "For God is a sun and a shield. He shall give grace and glory, and he shall withhold nothing that's good from those who walk uprightly." That's all that little lady ever wanted from me. Just that I be a decent human being. She used to beg me over and over, just be kind. And I never was, not even to her. But I've come to believe in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, that the way I live today, one day at a time, walking hand in hand with you as a friend, trying in my own feeble way to walk as you walk, uprightly, that every day I do this, I am in my own small way making amends to my mom and to a lot of other people that just shouldn't have been hurt by me. And I hope I'm right in believing this, because it's all I've got. And until you gave me this belief, I couldn't live with that. In my junior year of high school, I was suspended, I don't remember how many times, for going to school drunk, or going to school and getting drunk, or for being drunk in a school play. And this is not normal. Early in my senior year, I was expelled from the whole public school system in the state of Virginia. My father sent me to the reformatory. 3 weeks later, they sent me home. Now, you get expelled from reform school, you get to thinking you ain't wanted. They said I was a bad influence on them bad influences. I was allowed to graduate, though under rather unusual circumstances. They assigned me little simple things I had back in the 4th and 5th grade. And I done them at home, and somebody picked them up, and they said they graded them. I doubt it. I think they just wanted to make damn sure I never had a chance to come back. And not too long after the rest of them marched up on the stage and got a diploma, they sent me one through the mail. And not too long after that, one morning my daddy took me out in the front yard. He said, "Boy, I don't know what your trouble is or what you gonna do, Bert, but you gonna do it somewhere else." He said, "I want you to get off my place, and I don't want you to ever come back." And I remember how arrogant I felt, and the hate that I felt for this old gentleman when I staggered out of his front yard, fully confident that I could do as well or probably better than he'd ever done. And this man was one of the 10 wealthiest men in the state of Virginia when he died a little over 2 years ago. But I went then to the only place that a thing like me could go. I went to the riverbank under the bridge with the rest of the winos, to a place that we here referred to in AA sometime as Skid Row. And frankly, I wish we'd stop classifying ourselves. I don't think basically there's that much difference in any of us. We say we got high-bottom drunks and low-bottom drunks, and I've seen a few wide-bottom drunks. But I honestly don't believe that Skid Row is a geographical location. I don't think it really matters whether you drank Solok's and cheap wine with me under the bridge, or if you sip champagne from them long-stem glasses in a penthouse apartment with wall-to-wall carpets and velvet drapes at the window. If in your alcoholism you found yourself completely cut off from those around you, completely cut off from any divine help, then you've known Skid Row, just like me. Several years ago, after I first came to Alcoholics Anonymous, I took an ecclesiastical dictionary and I looked up the definition of the word hell. It said simply complete separation from both God and man. And I think not just me, but every alcoholic in this room has known his or her own hell. I was to spend a lot of years going from one place to another, knowing before I got there that I couldn't stay because I wouldn't belong. I was given a choice some 4 years after my father disowned me of either going in the Army or some branch of service or going to the penitentiary in Virginia for a year and a day for habitual drunkenness. And I spent, or misspent, some 4 years and 27 days, not as a soldier, but as very much of a liability to the U.S. government. I spent a little over 3 years of this as a patient in Walter Reed Hospital. I tore up a motorcycle one morning, drunk, and it was while I was in Walter Reed Hospital that I had my first encounter with these wig pickers we call psychiatrists. I had never had DTs. I don't know how I'd missed them. But it was after a particularly long and hard round with that rubber-dub, and we could buy it for 15 cents for an 4-ounce bottle. One night in the middle of the night, I run out. Some of you remember what that was like. And I got up, and in the dark, I went through everybody's wall locker, and I had a pillowcase, and I gathered up all the bottles I could find. Made it back to my bunk, and I opened the biggest one I had. And I took a whale of a dust cutter, 5 or 6 good swallows. But it turned out it won't Aqua Velva or Lucky Tiger or anything as palatable as that. 'Twas Cleanso shampoo. And I remember I could blow all them bubbles out, but I couldn't get none of them back. And there was a little Mexican boy in the bunk next to me, and he seen me foaming at the mouth, and he thinks I'm having some kind of a fit, so he calls a nurse, and they rushes me over to the emergency room, and I swallowed yards and yards of that hose. And while they was pumping me out, I blew up. And from there, they transferred me over to Ward 16. Or as we called it up there, I went over and joined the yo-yo squad. And after a few days, when they got me so I could stay on the ground, they turned me over to an old colonel who at that time was said to have been one of the most successful psychiatrists in the country in dealing with our kind of people. He got me in his office and he started examining me. He took a little rubber hammer and he tapped all my joints. Took a pair of calipers and measured my skull. Asked me about 1,000,000 questions. Kind I wouldn't ask a dog. And all the time he's doing this, he's writing. In 3 weeks, he wrote a book on me about the size of Gone with the Wind. And that's exactly what I thought I was, too. And then one day when he had me just about nuts, he says, "Hagood, that does it." He says, "I've finished my examination." He showed me his notes stacked about that high. He said, "Now I'm going to have to study these for a few days," and said, "I want you to go back to your room and just take it easy." He said, "Try not to worry too much." He said, "We might be able to do something for you." Well, I went back to my room, or to my cell, but I didn't take it easy. Hell, I walked the floor night and day. You see, I never had them things before and had all them little people climbing up me in my pajama jacket and out the pillowcase. I mean, folks that I knew. And a whole lot of them was dead. So I didn't take it easy. I walked the floor night and day, except when they give me a shot or slip me a pill or something, they would knock me out. I even began wondering what my funeral was going to be like. Here I am over 200 miles from home, and I don't know nobody there except them other patients over on Ward 11, and they all bed patients. They can't come. I can think of a whole lot of folks back home that would enjoy very much seeing me put away, but I couldn't picture none of them driving 200 miles for it. And that left me and the chaplain and the bugler and the pallbearers and the firing squad. And I was the only one in the bunch I even knew. So I won't get no better. And then one day the little nurse looks through the peephole in the door and said, the colonel wants you in his office. And I walk in and he don't help things none. He said, sit down, son, and get a grip on yourself. I got some bad news for you. And he said, before I tell you what I've discovered, I'd like to talk to you a little while about alcohol. Well, that was fine, because right about then, a pint of that rubber-dub would have been about 2 good drinks. He said, son, whiskey can kill a man 3 ways. So first, it can ruin his stomach. And my ulcer started burning. He says it can affect a man's liver, make it harden till it just don't work no more. Mine felt like a rock. And then he said, don't let this throw you, boy, but it can affect a man's mind, and your mind might not ever be normal again. Hell, it didn't throw me. It didn't even faze me. I knowed my mind never had been normal. And then he said, much as I hate to tell you this, I have discovered that you are an alcoholic. How about that? This old genius with that damn rubber hammer and them calipers and them embarrassing questions, he done worried the hell out of me for 3 weeks and then left me for 2 more weeks walking the floor wondering if they're going to bury me next Sunday evening or early Monday morning while he's a-studying. And then after all of this research, he comes up with this amazing discovery. Something I knowed before I got out of grammar school. But I realize now that that poor old man tried it in every way he knew how to help me. And I think maybe after that episode in his office, I might have gone a little off, sure enough, because for several days before anybody could get close to me without getting hit or kicked or bit. But up at Walter Reed, they had what we called the cocoon treatment. They had these long white sheets that they rolled and wrapped you in till you couldn't move nothing but your eyeball. And then they had these 2 big colored boys, one on each end. They had these 2 big tubs of water. One is just before freezing and the other one about 2 minutes past boiling. And they just dunk you in first one and then the other. Well, it don't make no difference how mad you are. You get over it. And it wasn't long till I ended up back in the colonel's office. And this time he was real nice to me. In fact, he always was. But this time he used a little different approach. He said that in his opinion, since I had been drinking so many different kinds of stuff for so long, and since alcohol seemed to play such a major part in my personality makeup, he thought it would be foolish or maybe even dangerous for me to try to quit. And that instead I ought to learn how to drink like a gentleman, sociably. I didn't know gentlemen drank, but he said they did, but not Solox and rubbing alcohol and that Cleanso shampoo. He said gentlemen drank mixed drinks, and that they didn't drink them by the quart or half a gallon. He said a gentleman at a social event during the course of an evening would have 1 or 2, or certainly not more than 3 drinks. And I remember thinking gentlemen must have mighty weak stomachs. But after another week or so of this kind of hogwash, He told me that since I was getting along so well and progressing so nicely, he thought it would be safe for me to go back to my own ward, and that providing I could find some reliable person to go with me, he might even arrange for me to get an overnight pass to go over town. I hadn't been outdoors for 2 years. Well, down on Ward 16, there was a little nurse. Pretty little thing. She's from Macon, Georgia. We called her Peachy. I'd been talking to her ever since I'd been over there, and she had, well, just judging from the way she talked, I thought she'd be mighty reliable for a pass. She had promised to go out with me if I ever got out. And sure enough, in a few days, I had me a pass and a date with Peachy, and I'm raring to go. But that afternoon, we went by the colonel's office to pick up that pass. He kind of threw a little cold water on my plans. He said, Hagood, on this pass, you've got 24 hours. But I want you to take just one drink. And I thought, that's a hell of a way to treat a man been locked up 6 weeks. But we went on, and we ended up in a real nice place down in Washington, Peachy and Newburgh. And after the waiter had gotten us seated, the maitre d' or somebody brought us the whiskey menu, I reckon he called it. Peachy told him we'd have something to drink before we ate. And I looked at mine, I couldn't pronounce half what was on it. So I called him over, and I said, Doc, what's the biggest drink you got? Well, he looks down his nose at me like I ain't real clean, and he points to something down near the bottom of the page he said was mighty popular. It was Blue Blazer. $2. $2 sounded like a hell of a price to pay for one drink, but, well, the name of the thing sort of appealed to me. Blue Blazer sounded like a right potent drink for a gentleman. So I ordered one, and Peachy ordered something else, and in a few minutes he come back with a little thing looked like an egg cup, had an olive in it with a little ginger ale or something splashed over it. That's for Peachy. For me, he got a thing about big as a milkshake shaker. Had a good pint of liquor in it, and I thought, look out, Colonel, I'm going to be late getting home. He set it down in front of me, and then he done what I thought was the damnedest fool thing I've seen a white man do. He struck a match to it and set the fire. Well, it kind of shocked me. I hadn't been used to nothing like that. Back home sometime, we'd accidentally spill a little white liquor on the table, on the floor, and we'd set the fire just for fun. But hell, at $2 a throw, I won't play it. I looked around, didn't nobody else seem to be paying it no mind. It won't upsetting Peachy none. Well, I was just an old country boy. I didn't know nothing. But I know damn well I won't want to pay $2 for a drink, sit and watch it burn up. So I takes me a deep breath and... and I throwed it down. Fire and all. And you know, I still feel like it ought to be against the law to sell a man thing like that without either telling him what to do or ask him if he knows what the hell he's doing. Peachy said my neck run out about a foot. She said it looked like a red rope. I turned red all over. And I upset the table right behind me trying to get out. But before I could get to the front door, two big waiters grabbed me, one on each arm, and on out through the kitchen to the back door, and they dumped me out in the alley. By the time I got myself together and got out to the sidewalk, the MPs had come. And they took me somewhere old town and locked me up. That was the longest night I ever spent in anybody's jail. I drank water out of everything in there. Next morning, old Colonel come got me. Took me back to Ward 16. And that afternoon, we was all in his office. Peachy was telling him what happened, but I couldn't talk above a whisper. She said it scared her. It damn near killed me. And you know, I just give up all hopes of ever being a sociable drinker. Because for me, even that ain't normal. I reckon the old colonel was kind of disgusted because it won't long. I got to where I could drink a little milk and eat a little soup. He gave me my discharge. And he said, go on home, Hagood, and quit worrying. He said, drink your stuff and have your fun. He said, you probably won't live long, but when you die, you won't know the difference. And I went once again back to the only place that a thing like me could go. To that place we call Skid Row. And this was to be my pattern for a few more years. To drink and go to jail. To get out and drink and go back to jail. To get out and drink some more and go to a nut house. Kind of reminds me of a story they tell about this little Salvation Army troop that was having some sort of a religious service on the street corner one Saturday evening. And they had a little band of sorts. They had a fellow blowing a horn, one beating a drum, a lady shaking a tambourine, another one ringing a bell, and this old boy, he'd preach a while, and they'd play a while, and they'd pray a while. Finally had the crowd pretty well worked up, and he called on Sister Sally to give her testimony. And she come up to the microphone, and she says, I ain't never drank no whiskey. Ain't never smoked no cigarettes. Ain't never committed none of that adultery. She says, I ain't never done nothing except ring this damn bell. And for the next few years, that was to be sort of my pattern. To drink that damn wine and be locked up somewhere or put away somewhere and get out and drink some more of that damn wine. But one November night, late in 1950, in a place called Lynchburg, Virginia, I left the riverbank and I came uptown to get me one more bottle of that wine and enough sleeping pills to make sure I never had to lay on the riverbank another night, because I just couldn't take it anymore. Being spit on and despised by even my own kind, the dregs of society. And late that night, sometime between 11 and midnight, I found myself sitting on a cold and a dirty and a lonely street corner up on Court Street next to the old Arlington Hotel. This was a night that I reached a point beyond which something inside of me could not or would not go. or as we say in AA, I hit bottom. Because that night, for the first time in my life, I took an honest look at Talbot Hagood, and I despised everything I saw. Because in me and about me there was absolutely nothing but filth and rottenness. I was 32 years old. Had at one time been a member of one of the most respected and one of the 10 wealthiest families in the state of Virginia. And all I had to show for my 32 years here was the clothes that I had on my back. 4 pieces, if you count them shoes separate. A 67-cent bottle of wine and enough sleeping pills to kill half the people in this room. This was a night that I had reached a point which was absolutely necessary for a thing like me. I'd been saying for years, if people would just leave me alone, I'd be all right. That night I realized that people left me alone when I was 7 or 8 years old. But I wasn't all right. I was drunk. And I was sick. And I was filthy inside and out. And I sat there trying to think of one human being I could call if I had a nickel to make a call. And I finally realized there wasn't another human being on the face of this earth that cared whether I lived or died. And I didn't either. And for years I'd been a traveling drunk. It seemed I was always going somewhere. And yet not that exactly either. I was always leaving somewhere. Because no matter where I was, I didn't belong. And that night I tried to think of some place that I had been before that I might be a little bit welcome if I went back. But there was no such place. Because everywhere I had ever been, there'd been trouble. Because I was there. That night I had run completely out of people, places, and things. People to use, places to run to, things to blame it on. I realized that night that the reason there had been trouble everywhere I'd been was because I was there every time. And I know without any doubt in my mind that with the last drink of that wine I was going to take every one of those sleeping pills. And it was much more than enough to do the job. And I honestly don't think it was because I particularly wanted to die. It was simply that I could no longer stand to live as an animal. You see, people had been telling me for 19 long, miserable years, your kind never changes. Hard, I hated them when they said that. Because I wanted to change. I never wanted to be what I was, any more than you did. And I couldn't have been more than a couple of drinks from taking them pills, and I heard men's voices from somewhere in the distance coming towards me. And they were laughing. And I hated their guts, because I hadn't laughed since I was a little boy. And I kind of drew up in a small knot by that light pole waiting for them to go by, and I knew they would, because didn't nobody stop for me except the police. But that night, one of the most wonderful things on earth happened in my life. 4 men on their way home from an AA meeting not only stopped, but sat down on a cold, dirty street corner with a filthy, stinking wino for more than 2 hours and talked about something called AA. Oh, God, it sounded wonderful. 3 of